Fred was craving love, but all he got from Victoria were prayers. He felt lost in his loneliness, but eventually he found comfort in the arms of someone else. So, what do you think will happen next? Will Fred stick with his praying girlfriend? Stay tuned, because this story is about to get interesting, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. The story kicks off with Fred trying to get closer to his girlfriend, but she shouted, praying and quoting scripture. Fred was already feeling the moment, but he just wanted to be intimate with her. He complained that they hadn't been close in over a year since they started dating. Victoria told him he needed to marry her first before they could take that step. After praying for him and anointing him, she left. Now, how is Fred going to handle this? Let's see what happens next. The next day at work, Fred's friends noticed something was off about him. They asked what was going on, and Fred decided to be honest. He told them that ever since he started dating Victoria, they hadn't been intimate, and it was really bothering him. His friend was shocked, but after listening, he suggested that Fred should date other girls since Victoria wasn't giving him what he needed. Fred, however, refused and said he wanted to marry Victoria quickly so they could be intimate. His friend disagreed and said he shouldn't marry just for intimacy. Fred didn't have much to say as his friend walked away. What do you think? Was his friend right? If it were you, what would you do? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Now, meet Essay. She's a sex worker hustling to make ends meet. One day, a customer books her for the night, offering 5,000 naira, though she usually charges 10,000. The man refuses to pay the full price, leaving Essay with no choice but to get into his car. She needed the money, but 5K seems pretty low, don't you think? Of course, no one should be in this line of work, but we'll see what happens next in her story. That night, Fred was at home when Victoria came over with some food. He wasn't in a great mood because of what happened that morning. He asked if she was going to spend the night with him, but she said no. Fred insisted, saying he really needed her to stay since he was struggling at work. Victoria, now concerned, asked what was wrong. Fred opened up, telling her that he had been chasing a big deal for 7 months, but it kept falling through. Victoria was surprised and asked if he'd prayed about it. He hadn't, so she decided to stay the night to pray for him. They spent hours praying together. Fred knelt down, and Victoria anointed his head with oil. The next morning, Fred woke up to find Victoria bringing him breakfast in bed. He was amazed, especially when she started singing praises to God. He thanked her for her kindness, but before he could eat, she stopped him. They prayed together before he had his meal. Fred wanted to kiss her, but she stopped him in a playful, sarcastic way, making him feel a little awkward. He shrugged it off and continued eating. Meanwhile, Essay was at home with her client, but she wasn't in the mood to deal with him anymore. She woke him up and told him to leave, saying she was expecting someone else. The man was surprised and asked, "Another client?" She snapped at him, calling him smelly, and kicked him out. He left angrily while she yelled after him. The same morning, Fred got ready for work and was surprised to see Victoria still cleaning the house. He asked if she wasn't going to work, and she replied that she'd be going to church later. She prayed for him before he left, holding his hands. Fred went to work and received a call from the company he'd been pursuing a deal with. They told him he had finally secured the deal and should come in the next day to sign it. Fred was overjoyed, but don't you think it was Victoria's prayers that made the difference? Maybe Fred wouldn't give her credit, since he was more focused on his desires. His friend came to celebrate the good news with him, and they had a great time together. Later that night, Fred went to a club with his friend and saw Essay. At that moment, his flesh betrayed him. He nervously approached her and invited her to his car to talk. After some hesitation, she agreed. Once inside, Fred awkwardly asked if she'd spend the whole night with him. Essay was thrilled, as she had never been paid so much before. And Fred drove her to his house to continue their night. They got to Fred's house, but he was still too shy. However, Essay did what she came there for, and Fred enjoyed himself like never before, especially after a whole year of longing for intimacy. For that moment, he forgot about Victoria. Guys, do you think what Fred is doing is right? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The next morning, Fred woke up to find Essay sitting on his bed, reading his favorite book. She was dressed up, and when she noticed he was awake, she demanded payment. Fred immediately transferred the money to her. SA then packed her things, left her contact details, and told Fred to read the book carefully. It had the power to change his life. Fred was surprised, thinking a prostitute could be so intelligent. That night, Fred returned home and saw Victoria, which surprised him since he wasn't expecting her. He told her about the deal he just signed with the company, and she was happy for him. Fred then suggested they go on a dinner date, but Victoria insisted they go for a night vigil instead. Fred complained, bitterly mentioning how she had been starving him of love, attention, and intimacy. Victoria tried to calm him down, calling him Brother Fred, which annoyed him even more. He told her that he wasn't her brother and that he was a man with desires. He added that he wasn't asking her to stop loving God, but if she wanted a man in her life, she should learn to balance both. Yet, Victoria remained unmoved, praying as she left. Meanwhile, SA was in her room arguing with a man who complained about not being satisfied. SA chased him out of her room, threatening to call his wife. He left angrily, insulting her. The next morning, Fred got ready for work, drinking his coffee, and then called Victoria, asking if they could meet to talk. Victoria declined, saying she was fasting and would talk to him once she was done. Fred was left wondering if their relationship was supposed to be like this. It's not that he didn't know the kind of person Victoria was, but it was still tough on him. Later that day, Fred sat in his office feeling bored. He remembered that SA had given him her contact, so he decided to call her. She agreed to meet him. When Fred arrived at her place, SA wasn't feeling well, taking her medication, but she still bragged that after finishing her meds, she could entertain more men. Fred was surprised, but told her he only wanted to talk about the book she had read last time. SA thought he came for something else, and when Fred offered her 10,000 naira just for her time, she was taken aback. No one had ever paid her that much without being intimate with her. She appreciated him, but quickly changed her mood when she insisted on touching him. Fred refused, saying he just wanted to talk. SA then hurried him to leave since she had an important customer coming. That night, Fred was still feeling bored and called SA, asking her to come over. She agreed, and when she arrived, Fred greeted her at the door, and Fred offered her a drink. He tried to strike up a conversation, but SA was annoyed. She expected things to go differently. She told Fred that if she were outside, she'd already have made 15,000 naira from a customer, but now she was with him, wasting her time. Fred then pulled out his phone and transferred 100,000 naira to her. She was surprised and asked why he would pick a prostitute off the street to have a conversation with. Fred smiled, happy to hear her speak such fluent English. They continued talking, and Fred asked why she chose this path instead of finding a job. SA got angry, stood up, and told Fred he had no business with her life. Then, they ended up being intimate. The next morning, Fred was still in bed when Victoria showed up unexpectedly. In a panic, Fred quickly hid SA in his wardrobe. But things took a turn when Victoria came in and she spotted SA's bra on the altar. After some awkward moments, Victoria confronted Fred. He tried to apologize, but after hearing the truth, he decided to break up with her, telling her that she deserved someone who would love her more than he could. Victoria was heartbroken and cried, praying that they wouldn't separate. She even anointed herself with olive oil, praying to keep them together. Fred felt conflicted. Do you think breaking up with Victoria was the right choice? Or did he make a mistake by cheating? From the beginning, Fred knew Victoria was devoted to God, so he shouldn't have expected a different outcome. But he still chose to date her. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Later that day, Fred visited SA's house. He told her that he had broken up with Victoria, which surprised SA. She commented that it was a shame a prostitute caused a relationship to fall apart. She told Fred not to call her, but he didn't listen. As a customer arrived, she told Fred to leave, and he left, watching them go inside. Fred returned home and apologized to Victoria, who accepted his apology and took him back. That same day, SA sat in her room smoking, reflecting on her past. She remembered her mother's harsh words telling her she was from the street and no one would save her. Her only option was to continue in the business. The next morning, Fred got dressed for his morning workout and saw Victoria in the living room. They talked, and she laid her hands on him, praying for God's strength before he left. Later, Fred stopped by Essay's house, trying to befriend her, but she refused. She told him they couldn't be friends because of her lifestyle. Despite her rejection, Fred tried to get closer, but Essay continued to shut him out and treated him rudely. He left, but as soon as he did, Essay broke down in tears, frustrated with her situation. Back at home, Victoria asked Fred if he had been to Essay's place. Fred denied it and walked away. The next morning, Fred went to work and met his friend. They discussed Fred's relationship life, with his friend warning him about Essay, calling her a prostitute. Fred defended her, telling his friend to stop calling her names. A few days later, Fred visited Essay again. She was smoking and told him a story about her past. She revealed that her mother was a prostitute who had considered aborting her, but couldn't. She had raised Essay and, over time, pushed her to continue in her mother's footsteps. Her mother told her no one would help her, and the only way to survive was through prostitution. Essay followed that path to survive. Fred was touched by her story, but Essay insisted he leave. She didn't want to complicate things, despite the care he showed her. That night, Fred returned home, and Victoria scolded him, warning him to stop seeing Essay if he wanted their relationship to work. She told him she knew he'd been meeting with Essay. Fred grew angry, telling Victoria that if she had fulfilled her role as his girlfriend, none of this would have happened. He was now attached to Essay and couldn't let go, so he walked out on her. The next morning, Fred visited Essay again. She was happy to see him. They talked, and she served him a delicious meal. Fred tried to get closer to her, and after some effort, he managed to win her over. They shared a kiss. Later, Fred took Essay to his house, but when Victoria saw them, she was furious. She exchanged harsh words with Essay, and they insulted each other in front of Fred. Fred didn't intervene, just silently witnessing the exchange. The next morning, Victoria arrived at Fred's house, but she was surprised to find that Fred had changed the locks, and she couldn't get in. Just then, Essay showed up, and as usual, the two women started fighting. They fought so fiercely that the gatekeeper had to call Fred, saying there was chaos at his house. Fred rushed home to find the two of them arguing. He apologized to both of them, feeling guilty for how badly he had hurt them. Victoria then asked him to choose between them. Who would he pick? Fred looked at Essay with a kind of softness that made her feel uncomfortable. She told him it hurt her deeply, especially after everything they had been through together. But Fred remained silent and didn't respond. Later that day, Essay went home, crying and regretting ever getting close to Fred. She remembered the words her mom had told her, to be careful and sensible in life. The next day, Fred spoke to his friend about his plan to marry one of the women in his life. His friend supported him, even though Fred hadn't made up his mind about who he would marry. So who do you think Fred will marry? The praying woman, Victoria, or the one who satisfies him, Essay? Let's find out. To everyone's surprise, Victoria was crying. What's going on? Did Fred leave her? Oh my, what a twist. Meanwhile, Essay was packing up her small apartment, saying goodbye to her old life. It seemed like she was turning a new leaf. What an unexpected change. Let's see what happens next. In a shocking turn of events, Fred and Essay are getting married. It's official. Fred chose Essay over Victoria. This is huge. I don't even know what to say right now, but it's honestly a little hilarious. Meanwhile, Victoria is devastated, crying her heart out while her pastor consoles her. This is serious, guys. Let's wish them all the best as they move forward. And with that, we come to the end of the story. The lesson here is simple. Don't start something you can't finish. When Fred met Victoria, he knew the kind of woman she was. It's unfair to expect her to compromise her faith just to please a man she wasn't married to. Maybe they just weren't meant to be. Make sure to share what you've learned from this story in the comments section. Thanks for watching this incredible story. Don't forget to subscribe for more interesting and educational tales like this. See you in the next one.